Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Let's Write an Adventure, our ongoing live stream where we are creating a completely custom campaign in real time so you can see all of the thought processes, decisions, questions, and techniques that go into creating a campaign using my technique, using my style. Uh, Today, we are going to be working on our sea shanty siren adventure, working on some of the complications that can ensue from that to make it a little more dynamic. But before we do, I should probably introduce myself. I'm RJ Kerr. I'm your host, as always. And if you are watching this stream for the first time or watching the recording and you haven't seen some of the previous streams, let me go ahead and get you caught up so that you know where we are in our progress here. So, as I mentioned, we are building a campaign in real time, completely from scratch. We are creating our own unique domain of dread, and we have already done a fair amount of work on this. We have decided to use a story circle style organization pattern to kind of organize this adventure or organize this full campaign, I should say, and all the adventures that go in it so that we have a cohesive story that we're telling with it. We have figured out how our characters enter into this domain of dread to a portal that opens up on the blood moon. We've talked about what kind of personal motivations would draw them through this portal. We figured out where they land, a shanty town called Darkport that's on the edge of an inland sea. And we've discovered that this inland sea is a big part of this domain of dread. It was once the basin of a thriving metropolis that it's now fallen to ruin and become flooded. And we also have figured out that the Dread Lord of this domain of dread is an elemental evil called Ovander. Although we're still polishing how he fits into the campaign overall. We've come up with our very first adventure where the characters are kidnapped and briefly enslaved and must escape their captors, and in doing so, discover the existence of a long lost artifact that gives the wielder some level of power over this domain. And they come to realize that finding this artifact, being the first to possess it, is going to be the key for them getting out of this domain of dread alive. They, of course, are not the only people looking for it. We've developed a couple factions to compete with them. And now we're working on a part of the adventure where the characters get proactive, where they have got lots of options for where they can go and lots of clues to explore. And each of those clues leads to a different node or an investigative scene, and which has its own clues that can be discovered and lead to another node or an investigative scene. And so the characters can follow a number of different trails of breadcrumbs all the way to the location of the artifact, which they ultimately need to discover and what marks the sort of midpoint of our campaign. To do this, we're using a node structure style, kind of as I described there, and that gives us a lot of agency for our players, but also lets us as DMs have a little bit of structure to work with so that we're not having to come up with everything from scratch as we play. Of course, we're going to be flexible, and there's going to be a lot of in between space here, but it gives us a few anchor points to really kind of focus our story in on. And so, what we're working on today is one of those anchor points. We've already done one that's a 5-room dungeon. We've done one that's a heist style adventure using a 5-scene dungeon methodology. And now we are working on what I'm going to call a complex social encounter. And so, using a completely different style, although you could certainly adhere the 5-room dungeon methodology to this style and use that in the same kind of context and come up with a very similar sort of adventure. But we've got the time, we've got the expertise, so why don't we build it out a little bit differently so we come up with a couple different techniques that you can have in your tool belt. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Like I said, we're working on this complex social encounter, and so what we're doing on this is we're really focusing not so much on mechanics or game mechanics, and we're focusing more on role play interactions for this adventure. And so, consequently, we did a little brainstorming to kind of figure out the nature of our primary NPC in this, the siren for which this adventure is named. And we came up with the idea that the siren is a predatory creature by nature, and that she lures beings to her toll to feast on them. However, she's recently developed a problem of another kind. We came up with a couple options for that. We decided on the siren needs to steal someone's voice and wants the characters to do it for her. And so she has some special requirements to this voice, and she selected a few potential NPCs who meet this requirement. So we've spent a little time really digging into the personality and the motivations of our siren, and then followed that up with the same sort of thing for our three NPCs that the characters are going to have to or may have to engage with. We decided to make this a little more difficult for the characters by saying that they couldn't just steal a voice; they have to convince one of these NPCs to give up their voice willingly. Um, and so, again, that makes it all about social dynamics and role play involved in here. And frankly, you could do this with very minimal dice rolls if you want to roll dice at all for this kind of thing. You could do a lot of this just through straight role play. And so we built out some pretty extensive information for our bard, our priest, and our widow, our three NPCs that are targeted here, giving them each an objective, ambition, values, a secret. And then we add a little bit of a little spice in there with a clue that the characters might be able to discover to learn their secret. We gave them a little description, so we've got some narrative elements to kind of pass along here when they first meet these characters, and gave them names and locations. Outline their dilemma as well, why they may want to give up their voice or why they may want not to give up their voice. And so we've kind of worked our way through those. And now I want to talk about complications and twists that we could toss into here, because we definitely want to have. We don't want this to be necessarily a straightforward interaction. We want there to be a little bit of strife, some consequences to failure, that sort of thing as we go. So we're going to dig into that today. In the meantime, let me remind you this is a collaborative channel, so please feel free to jump in the chat with your thoughts, opinions, ideas, comments, and questions, or anything else you want to talk about as we go along. Love getting your guys' ideas and your input. You come up with some terrific stuff when we're going through this. So really, really love all of the feedback that you guys jump into with the chat here. So please help yourself. Before we get started, it looks like we've got a couple comments already. Fantasy Animal Vegan says, let's get our brainstorming on. Yeah, fantastic. Absolutely. Great attitude. Jonathan Frost says, holy crap, it's Kursk. And introduces his character from one of our campaigns. Yeah, Fantasy Animal Vegan and Jonathan Frost both play in one of my ongoing campaigns. Good to see you guys all in the chat. Ben, good to see you here. Glad everybody has joined in tonight. And let's get rocking and rolling. Cool. All right. So we've come up with one complication where basically, if the PCs fail to convince an NPC to accept the terms of the Siren's contract, the NPC begins spreading word of their nefarious deal. And this threatens to make the PCs pariahs and prevent them from making further deals unless the NPC is silenced in some capacity. And so that's a consequence for failure, which I think is pretty cool. I think we need to build on a little bit more of the mechanic for this. What is that effect in game terms, in a tangible way that really will affect the characters? That's more than just like people here don't like you, because yeah, they're not going to feel the same sense of social pressure that you would if you walked into a town and realized that in real life nobody there liked you. That would be super uncomfortable. It will not be as uncomfortable for your players to handle that. And so we want to make sure there's real consequences to this. And so let's build that out as well. But we also maybe want to throw a couple things in here that are, little twists that we can toss into some of the role play elements here in case they're just going too well. We want to throw an additional challenge. So let's start by building out some of the mechanics for becoming pariahs. And let's say, let's give a good heading here, and we'll say, we'll say, let's see here, encounter failures, we'll call this. I was looking for the word. I was like, convention? No, that's not right. Encounter failure. We're going to call this, just define this section as a counter failure, and then we're going to say if the characters should trigger this effect, the following goes into effect for the settlement. I'll just say in question because we kind of know what we're talking about here. And let's see here. We've already got a comment. Jonathan Frost says goods and services increase by a percentage that increases over time. Yeah, I like that one a lot. Something that we really could do. We could actually, with this, introduce kind of in some ways, a loyalty mechanic that we can use in terms of kind of tracking their relationship to the town here, so that they're not irredeemable, right? Because we want to come to a situation where there's real consequences. At the same time, if they're like, "Oh crap, we got to make it up to the town," and we just built an orphanage, the town isn't still like, "Well, you're still jerks, even though you built this orphanage for all of our children." And so we can balance some of that out and have sort of situations where there's perhaps conflicted feelings about them in town as necessary. And so maybe we build out kind of a loyalty sort of spectrum here that we can assign point values to, and that can adjust some of the things like what the increase or perhaps even decrease in goods and services is for the characters over time. Let's see here. Ben Elder says traders refuse to serve you. Yeah, and if they really screw up, guards will eject you from the town, or at least try. Yeah, we should absolutely have some legal ramifications there as well. At the very minimum, maybe the guards are kind of trailing the characters in town, making it harder for them to kind of get away with stuff, making sure they're on their best behavior, looking for a reason to get into a tussle with them, perchance. So I kind of like the idea of toying with a loyalty mechanic for this. Not that it's necessary, but I think it might be fun for us to kind of dabble in that and see what we can come up with. So let's reword this. Let's say if the characters, we'll say if a settlement becomes hostile to the characters, the following goes into effect. It should be if a settlement. Cool. And then let's do a little subheader here, and let's say tracking. Well, loyalty is not the right thing, not the right name for it here, because loyalty is more of like an NPC kind of mechanic. Maybe tracking influence, or you could say tracking faction or what have you. But we'll say tracking influence or attitude. We'll say tracking attitude. Let's go with that. Let's see here. We got another couple comments here. Ben says maybe it could be different depending on the town. A more merchant town charges them more. A religious town will go full mob justice. Yeah, I like that. Fantasy Animal Vegan says rolls to throw spoiled produce. Ooh, that's such a nice touch too. Oh, yeah. That's a cool little world building element here. That would be fun. That like we can express some of just the collective anger of the community through like kids who like play pranks on them and like throw spoiled food, or like do the whatever the fantasy equivalent is like putting dog feces in a paper bag and lighting it on fire on your porch and like locking on the door and running away. We can come up with some stuff like that. And I also like Ben's idea of making this slightly unique based off of each of the settlements there, where we can make some general complications and we can make a couple of unique ones because we don't have a ton of settlements. So that's easier to kind of deal with. So let's just kind of capture some of these ideas and we'll change them as we go. Let's see here. General, we'll say universal setback, we'll say settlement specific setback, childish pranks, say throwing rotten food. Cool. And we'll kind of fill those out as we go. We'll build out more than just 3 of those, but so we don't forget the ideas that we've come up with here. Oh, hello, Mr. Max. I can't remember if I said hello or not, but yeah, good to have you here, man. All right. Tracking attitude or tracking like loyalty points or faction points or whatever you want to call it. There's a couple methods for doing that. I frequently see these things sort of metered out on like a scale of kind of like 1 to 10 and so everybody will factions will or they'll start neutral in many cases, so you kind of start in the middle of the spectrum there, and as you lose points you go towards 1, if you gain points you go towards 10. And if you hit 10 you're an absolute hero, if you hit 1 you're a complete pariah. But I have frequently found that almost gets into that almost gets a little too granular for me, and in the real sense when I'm actually kind of running a game, because really you're looking for kind of big things that that in terms of a town are going to affect that that attitude, that general attitude, or that prevailing sort of condition. And so I will tend to use a smaller scale than that. Um, and let's see, your Fantasy Animal Vegan says, is a green, yellow, red stoplight scale too simplistic? It is not too simplistic. In fact, I will use that for a lot of faction loyalty stuff, where I will actually give myself, influence die on this, and I'll say something to the effect of like, if you're trying to influence a faction and they're friendly to you, you roll a 1d4. If you're trying to influence a faction and they're indifferent to you, you roll a 1d6. They're hostile to you, you roll a 1d8. And if you roll a 1 on any of those, then you're successful in getting this whole faction to kind of move in that direction and take up whatever it is you're trying to convince them of. And so it makes it it can make it very simple, very quick at the table there. You could do the same thing with DCs. You don't necessarily have to use a whole bunch of different dice. You could, say it's a 10, 15, or 20, or a kind of thing for your difficulty class. But so there's nothing wrong with kind of doing a 3-wicket system. And I encourage that, especially if you're running a lot of different factions. Keep it simple for yourself. Since we kind of have the time here, I'm thinking we might make something that's just a little more complicated, just to kind of play with it a touch, and kind of see how it feels, because sometimes you just need to experiment. So I'm thinking if we do I'm going back and forth between a 5-point system and a 7-point system. Because we want to keep it simple enough, but we still want there to be kind of a little bit of room to move back and forth. I think the 5-point system is probably best. It's going to be easier to kind of understand the major wickets as we're talking about here, right? Because if you have, if everybody starts at a 3, right, and they lose faction, well, then they drop to a 2, and we know that, okay, a 2 is not all the way to 1. They're not a complete pariah, but there's definitely some bad blood in town on there, and we can sort of dial up sort of their interactions and the significance of that, and vice versa. If they're doing good things, they can get a little bit better, or then they can become like local heroes and that kind of stuff. And so it gives you a little less gradation to that, but it can be a little easier to just kind of conceptualize on the fly how this is going to work. Whereas if you're doing something that's like a 10-point scale and everybody starts at a 5 or a 6, and I got to figure out how is a 4 different from a 5? How is a 3 different from a 4? That kind of thing. Let's see here. Let's see here. Let's Ben Elder says, yeah, three strikes and you're out. Yeah, that's again an easy sort of tool to use. And when in doubt, I say pick three things. Fantasy Animal Vegan says the stoplight scale will also flash back the trauma of eating in a public school lunchroom in the 80s and 90s and pick up the tension for players. Yeah, that was like all at war in some of those lunchrooms. All right, fantastic. Okay, so let's go with a 5 point system here. Like I said, just to add a little bit of complexity to this, but not to get too out of the park here. So we're gonna say settlement general attitudes are determined on a 5-point scale. When the PCs arrive at a new settlement, they oh, yeah, I need a comma. Okay, cool. They start with 3 points. They lose points for hostile / negative actions and gain points for benevolent / heroic actions. If a group ever falls to 1 point, they are effectively pariahs, and if they rise to 5 points, they are local heroes. Cool. Kind of simple. We'll actually probably end up moving this outside of the sea shanty siren bit here because this is going to be a larger mechanic they're working on, but we can reorganize this later. And let's see here. We got another comment from Ben Elder. Could the actions of the party give a starting bonus or penalty to the party's reputation? I heard they took on a Sahuagin stronghold all by themselves, or I heard they served a beast of the sea, of the sea heathens. Yeah, you certainly could. In fact, one of the things that I would kind of do with that is that I would say that this is all local reputation until you max out on one end of the spectrum or the other, right? Like if you fall to one, yeah, you're a pariah in this location, but it means you start at like a 2 in nearby settlements because they've heard of, how terrible you are. Likewise, if you were at a 5 for a settlement, you're a local hero and maybe you start at a 4 for other nearby settlements because your reputation precedes you a little bit here. Absolutely, I think that it gives you a kind of a way that you can also kind of track their influence over the course of a larger region there without getting it overcomplicated. Fantasy Animal Vegan says brainstorming when the party maxes out the scale, they could get one use of the I know someone who homebrew rule where they get to name an NPC they know in town. Yeah, absolutely, you could do that. You could reward them in that way, and that's a cool kind of mechanical advantage for them. And maybe it's something that we work into what happens if a settlement becomes hostile, or what happens if a settlement becomes overly friendly to to a group of the adventurers here. Um, you could, yeah, definitely do that. I'm a big fan of the I know someone, I know a guy mechanic is what I always call it, because it's a fun storytelling, tool, and players don't tend to overuse it. I found they tend to kind of do this once in a while when they're really in a pinch, and it creates somebody that now that they owe a favor to, that they're indebted to. It gives you another kind of hook kind of character in there, which can be really useful. Jonathan Frost says, if in person, adopt a three die system, um, D12, D6, D4. If it's minor, throw a D12 at the party from across the table. It's smarts, but mostly benign. If it's moderate, a D6 hurts more severe. D4 potentially deadly. We don't condone abusing your players on this channel, however hilarious the idea of it might be. Yeah. So, all right. Yeah. So that's a pretty simple tracking mechanic here. Let's say, we're gonna want to retweak this. I'm gonna leave this kind of section kind of as written because we're gonna completely restructure it, I think, but I don't want to lose the idea on it here. So let's say the following go into effect for each go in effect based on the party's attitude points. Say. Yeah, we're gonna start with a 5 here, and we're gonna say, let's see, 5 points. And I'm gonna say TD, and we'll come up with stuff for that. And I'm gonna copy and paste and just to make this easy on ourselves, 5 points, 4 points, 3 points, 2 points, 1 point. Cool. And then we can kind of figure out what the boons and banes are for this deal here. Ben asks, are we saying 5 is good? I think for what we're trying to build out here in the terms of simplicity, I think it's good. Again, you could always go with 3. There's nothing wrong with doing that. You could do more than 5 if you wanted to. It just, I find that if I let the number get too high, I have trouble figuring out what the difference between the different levels is in terms of actually how it affects the characters. And if I let it get too low, sometimes it's too easy for them to fall into we're hero status or fall into we are pariah status. So I will use 3 when I think attitude is just going to generally influence things, and I think I'll use a number closer to 5 or 7 when I'm trying to kind of do a more intensive kind of tracking system here. So I think 5 is probably good for what we're doing here, and we can build out from there. Let's see here. Fantasy Loon says it's average. Ben Elder says, sorry, I'm not saying 5 is too many or not enough. I was asking if 5 is the high end. 7 is about as high as I would go. But my brain really likes 5 as a round number. It likes 3 and 5 and 10. 7 seems off, but it still works. But 7 is usually about as high as I'll go with something like this. But 5 just it for whatever reason it just feels good. It works well for me, and so I like it. I won't say that there is a cap that you should adhere to religiously. Merely find something that you can kind of conceptualize the finite differences between each step, what changes in the world at each step. Um, let's see here. Jonathan Frost says, I think the higher the better is more intuitive given the addition-based mechanic of the game. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. And then Ben Elder says, sorry, I was asking if five is their heroes and one is that they're pariahs. Yeah, yeah. So agreed. That's exactly kind of what I was thinking there, Ben. Is that they get 5 points, then that's wonderful. They're they're local heroes. They get 1 point, they're local pariahs, and then they some of that can extend to nearby settlements, but it doesn't translate completely. It just sort of it has kind of a ripple effect as it goes. So, if they achieve a 5 in one settlement, the next nearest settlement, they maybe start out as a 4. They achieve a 1 in or should say fall to a 1 in a settlement. The next nearby settlement, they start as a 2 as opposed to starting in the middle with a 3. It's kind of how I would conceptualize it. And so we need to wrap up here soon, but I do want to toss in a couple details here. So we're going to say, normal pricing, residents start different to the PCs. PCs experience only a locally appropriate amount of shenanigans, I guess we could call it. We'll say harassment. It's kind of our baseline here. So Fantasy Animal Vegan says, let's make it a logarithmic scale. My mother, who minored in math in college, would absolutely love that. But no, I'm not going to do that to myself or to you. Although I love the deviousness of that idea. Cool. All right. So so we're kind of coming up with this scale here, so I think this is a good. We're going to go ahead and put a pin in it for the evening here, but I think this is kind of a good basis. So I am so I think this is a good jumping off point. This is a larger mechanic we'll be able to apply to the rest of our world here, and really kind of track how the characters change and affect this world, making it very tangible for making their consequences of their actions in the world very tangible. Which is one of the best things you can do for world building, as far as I'm concerned, is make it so when the characters do something good things follow. They reap the benefits of that. When they do bad things, they get they reap the rewards of that as well. Cool. All right. Couple last comments here. Mr. Mix says, sorry, doing some paperwork at work, so I'm not able to contribute. I appreciate just signing in and listening to us while you're at work, Mr. Mix. We appreciate that. Just good to have you here, logged in and listening. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for our shorter episode here on Wednesday. We're going to do another one this Friday. That'll be at the later hour. That'll be at 8:30 p.m. Central Time in the U.S. If you're here, and we'll be on again for another hour or so on that one. If you have enjoyed this stream, please like, subscribe, leave a comment. All of that kind of stuff helps the channel grow, helps more people find us and get into the chat, and keeps things nice and dynamic, just how we like it. And as always, if you want to jump into one of my games, please check me out at startplaying.games/GM/RJ Kerr, or follow the link in the description of this video. Those are all my posted tables that are there. You can also request tables. So if you want a custom campaign, or you're not seeing a module on there that you would really love to run, or you're looking for a one-shot, just hit that request button, and we can talk about the details on that, work on pricing and all that kind of jazz. So, thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you all on Friday. Talk to you soon. Bye, everybody.